So one thing that some of you guys, you might not know about me, because I really don't talk about it a lot, unless I find out that you are as well. I'm a huge fan of a television show called Survivor. I've watched every season of this show that's been on like 20-some years now. Like they're on season 44. They do 2 a year, so it's like 22 years that they've done this. And I watch every single one of these episodes. I look forward to it when it comes on. And when they have a new season going on. Are you guys familiar with this show, Survivor? Yes. In case you're not familiar with it, it's a reality show where they drop 18 contestants off on an island, and they're forced to live together on this island. They split them up into teams, and so then they've got these different, they call them tribes, and so then the tribes compete against each other in challenges and do all these things. They are given bare minimum type of supplies. They sleep outside. They can build these little huts and things like that, but they're out in the elements and out in the rain, out in the cold night air, and all of those types of things. And it's just really, really rough. And then they're forced to live with each other, but then they vote each other off until there is just one person left in the game, and they're called the sole survivor. And that person wins $1 million. And so it's kind of a crazy little thing, if you will. The host of his show, his name's Jeff Probst, he calls it a social experiment, because it's really just what they do. They just want to see how are people going to react when you put them in these situations and force them to live like this, knowing that they've got to vote each other off, but they also need each other. You know, these tribes, they need each other. So if they want to beat the other tribe, they've got to stay strong so that they can win the challenges. They got to be smart so they can do puzzles and things like that in there. But they're also trying to make sure that they're not going to get voted off, so they're trying to vote other people off, right? So they put them in these elements to see how they will behave. They put different challenges in the game, like immunity idols, where people cannot vote for you if you have this immunity idol, and they put those out there to see if people will find them, and if they do find them, will they tell people they have it or not? And it's a crazy, crazy game. They live off of these three core values, I guess if you will. It's to outwit, to outplay, and to outlast everybody else. So you've got to be physically strong so that you can do challenges, provide a camp, maybe win some immunity idols. But you also have to be very social. You know, you want to make sure you're friends with people, because ultimately what happens is at the end of the show, they get down to like 3 people left, and then they have what they call their jury. The jury is a bunch of people that these people have voted off, and now those people that they voted off, probably because they lied to them at some point, that those people, the jury, are going to vote on who they think should get the $1 million out of the final 2 or 3 contestants left. So there's this social game where you got to be able to vote somebody out, backstab them in a sense, but yet do it in a way where that person's still going to like you in there. So anyway, so it's a crazy game in here. This season, which just started a few weeks ago, they started doing something where after they air the episode, they then post a podcast where they talk about the show. It's hosted by the same guy, Jeff Probst, who hosts the show, and they talk a lot about the behind-the-scenes stuff, the why and the how that they do the things that they do in the show, and what they were thinking the contestants might do when they created this challenge or obstacle or advantage, things like that. And so it's been kind of neat to see all of the behind the scenes and the why and the how and all that. It's been fascinating. I almost kind of look forward to that more than I do the show at this point, because it's kind of neat to see all the behind the scenes, right? So I tell you all that for a purpose. We're not just shooting the breeze here this morning. I tell you all that for a purpose. I feel like that's kind of where we're at in the book of Hebrews. So we've been on this journey of faith. Our author has been talking to us about, you know, how Jesus is superior, right? He's told us now that Jesus, he's a superior person. He's a superior priest. He's a superior payment. Talking about the sacrifice that he made and all that. Then last week we started talking about how our faith, that's a superior practice. Putting our faith in Jesus is a superior practice for us. So he's been telling us all of this stuff. Now as we start to get to the close of the book of Hebrews, I kind of feel like now we're getting to that podcast. Kind of the behind the scenes, the why and the how of all of this. And that's what we see in Hebrews chapter verse 12. It's kind of a behind-the-scenes podcast look, if you will, at the why and the how behind our journey of faith. Why we do what we do. The writer, who again, we've stated, we don't know who this was, who wrote it, this book, but the writer in this section, he uses the analogy of a race to get the point across to the readers in this moment. They would have known the Olympics, the Olympiad. They would have known races and running in that aspect. These people would have known that here. So today we're going to use a lot of race analogies, okay? I'll talk a lot of personal stuff today about racing and with Adam racing and me racing and things like that, because that's a big part of what we do at home and things. And so bear with all the personal analogies, if you will, today. But this is what the author does. He uses this idea of this race to get at a point. He compares the godly life to a great race. And he explains to the reasons behind God's actions towards us. And so today, I want us to break down Hebrews chapter number 12. We're going to walk through it, touch on a few verses, and kind of break this down to see why this journey of faith, why putting our faith in Jesus, why this is a superior practice in all of this. So let's break it down. First, I want you to see the contestants who are racing. The contestants who are racing. Look there at the first 4 verses of Hebrews chapter number 12. It says, "Therefore, since we are surrounded by so great a cloud of witnesses, let us also lay aside every weight and sin which clings so closely, and let us run with endurance the race that is set before us, looking to Jesus, the founder and perfecter of our faith, who for the joy that was set before him endured the cross, despising the shame, and is seated at the right hand of the throne of God. Consider him who endured from sinners such hostility against himself, so that you may not grow weary or faint-hearted. In your struggle against sin, you have not yet resisted to the point of shedding your blood." So here he's talking about this list of witnesses, if you will. He's pointing us back to Hebrews chapter 11 that we looked at last week in this hall of faith in the Bible, if you will, and all these great witnesses there in chapter number 11. He wants us to see those past contestants, if you will, that have run this race of life. He wants us to see those men and those women as inspiration. He wants us to be inspired by their journeys, by what they went through and what they did. These men and women, these guys, they had flaws and they had mistakes, and we looked at that last week, but yet they endured. They endured through it. And so the writer is telling us, therefore, since we have such a great cloud of witnesses, because of those people, he says, listen, if they can do it, so can you. If those people can walk this journey of faith, if they can endure, even through their flaws, even through their mistakes, if they can do it, so can you. You can do this. But listen, we're not racing against them. Please understand that. We're racing against ourselves. Many of you know that, my son Adam, he's been working really hard at his running, and he's currently training for a half marathon that we're going to run here in a couple months. It's less than like 50 days out now in this. But as he's been training and actually putting effort into his running now, he's building his speed and his endurance, and he's doing really, really well. And we ran yesterday in a little 5K, and he set another personal record for himself, and his times just keep dropping and all of this. And so when we get to a race now, we're kind of walking around the start and things. Adam, and he even said this yesterday. He's like, I'm looking to see who's my competition. And I always tell it, Adam, you're not racing against those people. You're racing against yourself. You just want to better yourself. That's the point of it. You're not running against them. You're racing against yourself. You see, in a race, you have to run your race. You can't get caught up in trying to run somebody else's race. I've done that. If you go out too fast, you try to run with other people because they're running fast and you want to run fast. And next thing you know, you're 2, 3, 4 miles in and you're tired because you've been running somebody else's race and not your own. You have to run your race. That's why the author there in verse number 1, he says, and let us run with endurance. Look what he says. The race that is set before us. We're each running our own race. And your race is not going to look like my race. My race is not going to look like your race. Your race is not going to look like the race sitting with the person next to you. That's not what's going to happen here. We are running the race that is set before us. Listen to me. Your journey of faith will not look like anyone else's journey of faith. It's not going to look like that. So please don't compare yourself to other people. Don't look at other people and say, man, I don't see why they're looking so good. You know, why does everything seem to be going so good for them, but it's not going good for me? And why is this happening for them? Why is that happening? Your journey of faith is not going to look like everybody else's. You're running the race that is set before you. Too often we compare ourselves with other people, right? And we often, we blame this on like social media, you know, and we could probably do that to a sort, but those of us who are like, you know, of the age of pre-social media, you know, I fall in that category, and there's some of you too as well. Those of us that are that old and we understand life before social media, we were still comparing ourselves to others. Mm-hmm. We still did it. We just weren't doing it on Facebook or Instagram or any of those other social media sites. But we want to compare ourselves. The author says we can't do that. Look what he says there in verse 1. He says, let us also lay aside every weight and sin which clings so closely. The author here, he's telling us, he said, listen, don't carry the burden of comparison. Don't carry that. Don't weigh yourself down with the weight of the world. This is not bad stuff. That when he says there, you know, in that phrase there, when he says, "Let us lay aside every weight," this is not bad stuff. It's not evil things that he's talking about there. It's just stuff that's distracting. It's stuff that causes us to compare ourselves with others and to get our focus off of where it needs to be. Because it's easy for us to compare ourselves with others. It's easy for us to be distracted by what is happening in the world. And when that happens, we can lose focus on the race that is set before us. However, the writer does include the bad stuff. That's why he says, and sin, which clings so closely. You see, it's difficult when we run with that extra weight in our life and that sin that clings so closely. And you know, in the running community, there's a lot of talk about, you know, what runners should or should not look like, and you'll hear a popular phrase, you know, out there today, that every body is a runner's body, you know, and things like that, and it's true, you know, it's true. Anybody can run, anybody can be a part of that. It doesn't matter. You don't have to have a certain look, a certain shape, this and that. But from personal experience in my running journey, I will tell you that when I'm carrying more weight, my running is a little harder. It's a little bit more difficult. It's slower. It's harder for me to run. In that I'm not running as fast right now as I was 2 years ago when I was 40 pounds lighter. That's just the truth of it. Can I still run at this weight? Yeah, I can do that. I feel like I do pretty well for myself. But man, it's harder for me to run now than it was a couple years ago when I was lighter, when I wasn't as heavy in there. And this is what we're talking about here. This weight and sin that clings so close to us. The writer says, man, that's going to weigh you down in this race. He said, don't get caught up in that. Don't get hung up in these things here, to carry around that extra weight, that sin that clings to our life. And listen, when we journey through this life with sin in our lives, we're adding weight that's going to hinder us from being our best. It's what it does. And look, there's an ultra race out there. It's called the Georgia Death Race, right? That makes you want to sign up for it, right? It's called the Georgia Death Race, okay? And it's an insane race just because of the geography of the race. It's run in the mountains of Georgia. In there, you run like 74-ish miles, okay? It's roughly 74 miles, a little bit more than 74 miles, I believe, in this. But you run. It has 16,000 feet of elevation in this course. 16,000 feet of elevation, 16,000 feet of descent in this. It's a grueling race. It's tough. I know some people who have run it. It is a very, very difficult race to run. If that was not enough, the fact that it's 74 miles, that the fact that you're going to climb 16,000 feet and then you got to go down 16,000 feet, people are like, oh, the down part's the easy part, right? No. Actually, they would probably tell you the down part is probably the worst. It destroys your quads. But you got the 16,000. It's grueling enough. To add even more to this death race, every runner in the race is required to carry a 1-pound railroad spike. It doesn't seem like a lot. Just 1 pound, just a little railroad spike. Who cares, right? But after 74 miles and 16,000 feet, that 1 pound of extra weight destroys you. But you have to carry it. I tell you that to tell you this. Sometimes when we're running this race of life, we might have a little sin that's in our life, maybe we just gossip a little bit, maybe we tell some lies here and there, this and that. We don't seem like it's very much. Well, it's not that big of a weight. It's not that big of that. I could carry that through this race and I'll be just fine. But listen, it's going to hinder you from being your best. Even just a little bit of sin in your life can hinder you from being your best. James chapter 1, verse 14 to 15, it says this, but each person is tempted when he is lured and enticed by his own desire. Then desire, when it has conceived, gives birth to sin. And sin, when it is fully grown, brings forth death. The writer says, hey, don't be distracted by the world. Don't carry around that extra weight in the sin which does so easily cling to us, closely cling to us. When we are told to focus, we are then told what to focus on in this journey. Look what the writer tells us there in Jesus, in verse number 2. He tells us to focus on Jesus, the founder and the finisher of our faith. Verse number 2, it says, looking to Jesus, the founder and perfecter of our faith, who for the joy that was set before him endured the cross, despising the shame, and is seated at the right hand of the throne of God. Verses 3 and 4, it says, consider him who endured from sinners such hostility against himself, so that you may not grow weary and faint-hearted. In your struggle against sin, you have not yet resisted to the point of shedding your blood. We've got to focus on Jesus. He's the founder and the perfecter of our faith. The King James Version will say the author and the finisher of our faith. He's the start line and the finish line of all of our races. He's the one that we're looking to as we're running and as we're racing. Yesterday, Adam, in this 5K, somebody in our run group caught this picture of Adam as he was coming towards the finish line. He was looking at his watch. And I saw this picture, and I'm like, Adam, what are you doing? And he's like, I knew I was running really fast, and I just wanted to see how fast I was running. He's literally just a couple hundred feet from the finish line in this picture. And he's focused on something else and not the finish line. And I told him, I said, Adam, don't worry about that. In that moment, when you can see that finish line, that should be your focus. And you should be looking at that finish line. And you should be focused on getting to that finish line as fast as you can. We can see the stats later on the watch. We can look that up later. Just get to the finish line. I saw a video on social media last week, a week before. It was a track race. And it was like a 100-yard dash or something like that. And this guy they were running, and this guy was in the lead. And just before the finish, he looked at the guy next to him, and he threw up the deuces to him, like to taunt him as he was running. And as soon as he looked back and did that, he tripped and fell. And the guy that he was throwing the peace sign up at ran and won the race. As he tumbled on the ground, probably got himself hurt in the process. How many times do we get distracted by our accolades, by our accomplishments, by what's going on, the blessings of our life, and we lose sight of what we're to be focused on?
I'm here to help.
We lose track. We lose track of this. We have to stay focused to finish our race. Stay focused on Jesus. Don't get distracted by the things that are going on in the world, the things that are going on around you, the good things and the blessings that are going on in your life. Don't get distracted by those things. You stay focused on Jesus in the race that is set before you. You focus in on that. But man, listen, that's hard to do all the time, right? It's hard for us to do. So the author then talks about the control in racing. He talks about the control in racing. Look again in our text there. In Hebrews chapter number 12, beginning verse number 5, and down verse number 11, look what it says here. It says, and have you forgotten the exhortation that addresses you as sons? My son, do not regard lightly the discipline of the Lord, nor be weary when reproved by him. For the Lord disciplines the one he loves and chastises every son whom he receives. It is for discipline that you have to endure. God is treating you as sons. For what son is there whom his father does not discipline? If you are left without discipline, in which all have participated, then you are illegitimate children and not sons. Besides this, we have had earthly fathers who disciplined us, and we respected them. Shall we not much more be subject to the Father of the spirits and live? For they disciplined us for a short time, as it seemed best to them, but he disciplines us for our good, that we may share his holiness. For the moment, all discipline seems painful rather than pleasant, but later it yields the peaceful fruit of righteousness to those who have been trained by it. In this section here, the author, he's talking about this discipline that comes from God. This is meant to help us to stay in control in our race. It's meant to keep us in control. Verse number 6 is probably the key verse in this section right here. And it says, for the Lord disciplines the one he loves and chastises every son whom he receives. That word chastises there, it comes from this Greek word that means child training, instruction, or discipline. So back like in the Greek culture of the day, Greek boys were actually expected to train every day in the gym until they reached maturity. It was expected of them to do that. That was a part of the boy's upbringing, for that boy to mature, to become a man. And so our author, he's using this analogy for our Christian lives by saying that discipline in our lives is a way to help us to mature as believers. When God disciplines us, when God chastises us, he's doing it to help us to grow. He's doing it to help us mature. Verse number 11, it says, for the moment all discipline seems painful rather than pleasant, but later it yields the peaceful fruit of righteousness to those who have been trained by it. This is why the writer told us in verse number 5, not to disregard the discipline of God. He doesn't want us to be discouraged by the discipline, because it's all about teaching us to control ourselves, to stay focused on the race and what's before us. God wouldn't do this to us if we weren't his children. He wouldn't do this to us if he didn't love us. God is doing this to mature us, to help us to grow. And listen, pain, although never pleasant, has a purpose. And that is to bring peace in our lives. It's not pleasant to go through it, but there's a purpose behind it. It's to bring peace into our lives, to help us to put ourselves in control, if you will. So look at the encouragement the writer gives us in verses 12 and 13. It says, therefore, lift your drooping hands and strengthen your weak knees, and make straight paths for your feet, so that what is lame may not be put out of joint, but rather be healed. I love this statement. I love this. It's as if the author is saying, get a hold of yourself. It's like he's saying, shake those evil thoughts and control your body and run the race that you've been taught. I can almost see the author, kind of standing somebody up taller, and fixing their collar, and fixing their hair. And he's saying, hey, fix yourself. Get yourself back under control. You can do this. You can handle this in here. And just stay in control. Don't lose focus. Don't lose your thought here. And the reason the author is telling us this is because there are challenges in racing. There are challenges in racing. When running a race, and especially in a big distance type race like a marathon, runners will naturally get tired, right? It happens in every race, even like 5Ks. You just kind of get tired. You kind of get in this middle part of the race where it's like, you've lost the excitement of starting the race, but yet the finish line's still kind of far away, and you're kind of like, why did I do this? Type of thing. But you get tired. And so runners have to train themselves to overcome those physical things where your body is getting tired. You have to train yourself to do that. Because the first thing that happens when a runner, when they start to get tired, is that their arms will drop. Their arms will droop, their shoulders will drop, and the position and the motion of the arms, they're very important in running. It's not just your legs, it's not just your feet. Your arms are important. Your arms are going to swing you into motion and to keep you moving. And so when runners get tired, their arms will drop and they're not pulling themselves through their stride the way that they should. And that's the first sign. If you watch a marathon on TV and you see the elites, the commentators will often say they're fatigued, and we can see it in their arms. Because their arms begin to drop. They begin to lose form. The second thing that will happen is the knees will get weak. The knees will kind of wobble in there, and they will the arms will droop, and then the knees will begin to wobble, and you probably see it a lot, probably more in like Ironmans and triathlons and things. You'll see like runners that they can't even stand anymore, right? They're like crawling to the finish line. It's because they've gotten so fatigued. They've hit this point of challenge in the race where their bodies are wanting to get up, but they're trying to keep going. And so listen, in every race, you're going to face challenges. In this race of life, you're going to face challenges. The question is, how are you going to handle the challenges? How are you going to do it? How are you going to overcome the obstacles in this race and in the challenges that are set before us? One strategy that like experienced runners will use is they will run in packs. You will often see that when you're watching the elite runners, they will run in a pack together. Because having that person with you, they're able to gauge each other's pace and they're able to feed off of that. They will oftentimes flip about who's leading the race because that person's going to take all the headwind and the others can kind of draft behind them, and they will kind of rotate in that. And although they're competing against each other, they will work together in that in that way so that they can help preserve that energy in there. There's also an emotional component to it. When you're running with people, when you're in a pack, you can encourage each other. And you'll see that often in races too, where they're talking to each other. And we can't always hear what they're saying, but they're talking to each other and trying to encourage each other to press towards the goal, to keep going, to keep it going on in there. Everybody is exhausted, but that camaraderie and that mutual encouragement becomes great motivation for runners. This honestly is something that I kind of struggle with in running. It's kind of a block that I'm having right now. Is a mental block. It's kind of an emotional thing, and I'm getting in my head very easily when I'm running, and it's very discouraging for me. And just a couple weeks ago, I was running a 10K race over in Stewart, and I was running that race, and I started out like I was doing okay, and then I got to that middle part of that race, and mentally I just kind of lost it. And I just got into my head about it, and I wasn't happy with the course and the way it was laid out and all this. And I just got into my head, and then everything became negative. And so I ended up stopping running. I switched to what they would call intervals. I was running for a little bit, then I'd walk for a little bit, I'd run for a little bit, I'd walk for a little bit. And I was just doing that, and I was so disappointed in myself. I knew what was happening. Like, I knew I was in my head. I just couldn't get myself out of it. And then all of a sudden, this lady comes up behind me. And as this lady comes up behind me, I didn't know who she was. I still don't know who she is. As she's coming up behind me and passing me, she just said something to me, some kind of encouragement to keep going, to finish, like we're almost there, or something like that. I don't even remember exactly what she said. But whatever it was that she said, it just flipped a switch in my mind. And it was like, yeah, she's right. I can do this. And so then, man, I started running again. And I took off, and I was running. I probably ran faster in that last stretch, last maybe mile of that race than I did any other part of the race. I actually passed the lady who gave me the encouragement and finished before she did. All because somebody was there to encourage me, to give me the motivation that I needed to get going. And this year, this is what our author is doing in this next portion of Scripture. He's giving us that encouragement there. Look at verses 14 down to verse number 17. It says, strive for peace with everyone and for the holiness without which no one will see the Lord. See to it that no one fails to obtain the grace of God, that no root of bitterness springs up and causes trouble, and by it many become defiled. That no one is sexually immoral or unholy like Esau, who sold his birthright for a single meal. For you know that afterwards, when he desired to inherit the blessing, he was rejected, for he found no chance to repent, though he sought it with tears. The author here is giving us this encouragement. He's saying, listen, there's challenges, there's difficulties in this race in here. But here's what he's telling us. He says, listen, we are running our own race, but we are not running on our own. We have a race that is set before us, and we're to stay focused on the race that God has set before us. But I want you to know today, you're not running on your own. You've got people who are running beside you, and you are running next to people. And our job is to encourage other people. Our job is to strive for peace with everybody, to live a life of holiness with everybody, to see to it that nobody fails to obtain the grace of God, to see to it that no root of bitterness springs up in my life or anybody else's life, to make sure that there's nothing that's causing trouble in anybody else. We are running our own race, but we are not running on our own. We're here for each other. We're here to encourage each other to keep running, to run in peace, to run in holiness, to see that nobody fails. This is what we're doing. We're not running on our own. We have teammates in the race. Some of them will be there to give you help in your time of need. Some people are going to need you to be their help in a time of need. You have friends that need help in this race. Some are weak. Some are feeble. Some are lame. And you're called to strengthen their hands. You're called to strengthen their knees, if you will. You're called to make straight the paths of their feet. You're called to encourage the runner to finish strong. If you see somebody who's weak in faith, God's call is for you to strengthen them, to encourage them, to help them with their faith, to help them in their walk with God, to talk to them, to encourage them, to bring them to see your own walk of faith, to encourage them through that. So if you see somebody who's tired, you see somebody who's struggling to live righteously, if you see somebody who's just, man, they can burn out because of the way they see the world going. They see the things that are happening in the world, and they're tired of seeing the wicked prosper. Listen, man, maybe they're tired of being reproached for Christ and all that. Listen, God's call upon your life is to help them. That's God's call upon your life. We are better together. We need to strengthen one another, to help them see the reward of following Christ, to help them see the joy in their own life when facing these things. When I was struggling in that race a couple weeks ago, that lady, she encouraged me. And man, I told you I finished strong, and I crossed that finish line before she did. And you know what I did? I stopped there at the finish line, and I turned around and I waited for her. I waited for that lady to finish the race so that I could thank her for encouraging me. And this is what we do as Christians. We are a community together. And we're better together. And it's important that we can share the burdens together. We can share in these challenges together to lift each other up, to strengthen each other, to straighten our arms, to strengthen our knees so that we can run this race to the best of our ability. This is what we do as Christians, as believers. And when we've overcome those challenges, then we get the celebration of racing. We get the celebration of it. When a race gets challenging, you have two choices, really. You can quit. They call that in the racing world, the running world, they call it a DNF. You did not finish. You can DNF, you can quit the race and if you want, or you can push through and you can finish the race and you can celebrate that accomplishment. There's two choices that you got. Closing out this section, the author here, he compares two mountains. An Old Testament mountain and a New Testament mountain. He compares these two mountains to show us the choices that we have in this journey. Look with me, if you will, verses 18 down to verse 21. It says, "For you have not come to what may be touched, a blazing fire and darkness and gloom and a tempest, and the sound of a trumpet and a voice whose words made the hearers beg that no further messages be spoken to them. For they could not endure the order that was given. If even a beast touches the mountain, it shall be stoned. Indeed, so terrifying was the sight that Moses said, I tremble with fear." The mountain here that's being described, this doesn't even need a name because all of these Jewish readers, they would have understood. They would have known what this was, that this here was Mount Sinai. This was the mountain where Moses got the law, the 10 Commandments here. This was where the Old Covenant was made with Israel. The mountain, it stands for that Old Covenant. It's a covenant that they have left that they have left behind in order to embrace the life of Christ. You remember the context, right, of the book of Hebrews. These Christians were struggling with wanting to give up their faith. They wanted to quit, to DNF They wanted to quit the race and to go back to the old way, to go back to the old covenant. But the writer here is telling them, listen, we don't want to do that. We don't want to do that and go back to the old covenant. By describing the results of the choice, the author is encouraging them to remain faithful to Jesus. Don't look back, the writer's telling them. Don't look back to that. That's a covenant of gloom and doom. It has condemnation. It's not salvation. It's not what we want in a race. To quit, to DNF. You don't want that. Moses, understand, when we were discussing, Moses did not fear his own life, okay? He didn't fear his own life. Deuteronomy chapter 9, verse 19, it tells us, "For I was afraid of the anger and hot displeasure that the Lord bore against you, so that he was ready to destroy you. But the Lord listened to me that time also." Remember while Moses was up on the mountain getting the 10 Commandments, getting the law, the Israelites were down at the bottom worshiping a golden calf that they had made. And Moses was fearful of God destroying them. Moses knew that the people had rebelled against God and that they deserved to die. He knew that. And so he asked God to spare them, and God did that. But his fear shows the serious penalties involved with breaking the Sinai covenant, to breaking the law. But in contrast, there's a new covenant that's in place. A celebration and fellowship with God. Look what he goes on to say, verse 22 down to verse 24. "Is but you have come to Mount Zion, and to the city of the living God, the heavenly Jerusalem, and the innumerable angels in festal gathering, and to the assembly of the firstborn who are enrolled in heaven, and to God, the judge of all, and to the spirits of the righteous made perfect, and to Jesus, the mediator of a new covenant, and to the sprinkled blood that speaks a better word than the blood of Abel." The new covenant is filled with happy people, where angels sing and rejoice. This is the reward of the saved. This is a reward of those who endured the challenges and overcome the obstacles and finished the race. These are the firstborn, the children of God, if you will, the ones who have been welcomed by the judge of the universe. These people are not perfect. You and I are not perfect. But they have been made perfect by the blood of Christ, which promises forgiveness rather than vengeance. This, the writer tells us, this is the unshakable kingdom of God. Look what he says, verse 28 and 29. "Therefore let us be grateful for receiving a kingdom that cannot be shaken. And thus let us offer to God acceptable worship with reverence and awe, for our God is a consuming fire." This is the unshakable kingdom of God. This is the celebration of running. This is the joy of crossing the finish line. Because as long as you finish, no matter how the race went for you, no matter how you handled those challenges and those obstacles during the race, you're going to get a reward. You're going to get to celebrate finishing the race. Last year, I decided to run our local marathon here. They call it the marathon, the Treasure Coast. A lot of people just call it the Treasure Coast Marathon. But I decided to run that race, and my training hadn't gone as expected in that, but I was prepared to run the race, and it did fairly well, I thought, for this race. And so as the race started, I was feeling pretty good, all until I wasn't. Mile 10, I started cramping out of nowhere. My legs started cramping. Came out of nowhere. I feel great. Just all of a sudden, boom, it just happened. And so I switched to those intervals again, that run-walk type intervals. And so I would run until the cramps started up, and then I would walk until the cramps ceased. And then I would run, and then when I started cramping again, I would walk. And so I actually did that for about 2 miles. But by mile 12, anytime as soon as I would start to push off with my leg to run, my legs would just seize up. They would just start cramping. Both legs would do that. I saw Amanda at mile 14. And as I was coming up and I could see her in the distance, in my mind I was thinking, I'm quitting. This is ridiculous. I'm at this point, just barely over half of the way through. It's like, this is ridiculous. I'm just going to hop in the car. We'll just drive back to the start line. I'm just going to finish this race. But as I began to approach her, something just changed in my mind. And I thought to myself, I can't quit. What would I be teaching my kids if I quit this race? And so I got to Amanda and I told her, I said, listen, this is going to be a long time, but I'm not quitting. I can't even run at this point. I'm just going to walk and do my best, but I'm not going to quit. She said, okay. She said, I'll see you at the finish. And so I did. I took off. And I continued walking with cramping in my legs for the next 14 miles. It took me 6 hours and 16 minutes to finish this race. Man, I was tired. I was hurting. I was sunburned, being out there so long. But I finished the race.